The Pride movement, so-called, the quote-unquote gay rights movement, the LGBT movement, whatever label you want to put on it, is itself collapsing. The Post-Millennial has a report about what was supposed to be the biggest Pride event in the world, and it didn't work out very well. Attendance was way down, and we're seeing this trend all over the place. Pride is collapsing, as we have chronicled on this show. But I want you to pay attention to the excuse that the LGBT activists are using for why this is happening, in particular for this event. Reading now from Post-Millennial says, Sunday marked the final day of World Pride 2025, which was held in Washington, D.C. this year, the first time in the U.S. since 2019. Attendance numbers for the biannual festival, especially among international attendees, were reportedly down. Ashley Smith, board president of Capital Pride Alliance, told the Associated Press, international numbers were noticeably down, with some would-be attendees opting not to travel to the U.S. In protest of President Donald Trump's policies or over fears of harassment. Smith said that should disturb us and mobilize us. Heading into the final weekend, which included the Capitol Pride Parade, the BBC reported that event organizers dropped their estimated crowd size to around one-third of previous estimates. Ryan Boss, executive director of Capital Pride Alliance, told NPR, we anticipate bookings to be much higher at the time for World Pride and do know that the climate, the concern for folks internationally to travel to the United States is real. Montreal-based data analyst Alice Sarager, who's transgender, had initially planned on attending the event, but was concerned about traveling to the U.S. It is a risk to now come over, and especially as a trans woman, Sarager said. So, attendance was about 30% of what they projected, which is hilarious and great. And what's the reason they give? Well, we heard about it in the article. I also have a report from something called Queer News Tonight. And I know you're thinking that, well, Queer News Tonight is what they call the evening programming block over on MSNBC, but actually it's a whole separate thing. This is a whole separate thing they do called Queer News Tonight. And they had a report on this issue as well. Let's watch that.
World Pride DC only meets 33% of projected attendance and revenue, mostly over concerns of fear. World Pride in Washington finished last night in the shadow of the Capitol and the White House. But largely, the news promised by World Pride organizers had disappointing results for attendance and revenues. World Pride may not even end up to be the largest LGBTQ event in America in 2025. In January, the event organizers had projected that the celebration, which coincides with the 50th anniversary of Washington's first Pride March, would attract 3 million visitors and contribute nearly $800 million to the local economy. But their expectations have now dropped to about a third of their previous estimates, end quote. Destination DC, the official tourism organization for the city, reports that overall occupancy over the weekend in Washington, D.C. was down 3% compared to the same weekend in 2024. This means that the visibility of Pride may not have drawn the expected huge international visitors. The downturn of the entire city may suggest concerns related to World Pride may have kept even more tourists away. Washington's mayor, Muriel Bowser, discussed the concerns of the weekend when she acknowledged the visitors, saying, quote, feel scared that an environment is developing that is anti-LGBTQ, but we can't live in fear. We have to live our lives and be as best prepared as we can, end quote.
Now, I have to say, just a little bit of feedback, a little bit of, constructive criticism. Very poor performance by the news anchor there. She can barely read the prompter. I expected more from Queer News Tonight. When I heard about Queer News Tonight, I thought, well, that name must be synonymous with broadcasting excellence. So I'm shocked by the mediocre quality of that report. But in any case, so this was supposed to be the big international Pride event. They only do it once every 2 years. Organizers were expecting a lot of pent-up demand. They thought it'd be a huge turnout. And instead, they got a third of the crowd they expected, which, again, hilarious and great. But what is the reason they offer? Well, what's the real reason for this? We know the real reason, as we've talked about, is that the Pride movement, so-called, the quote-unquote gay rights movement, the LGBT movement, whatever label you want to put on it, is itself collapsing. And it's been exposed for what it is. People are tired of it. They're fed up with it. They're exhausted by it. And I think a critical mass of people just aren't buying it anymore. And I think probably a critical mass of people never bought it, but pretended to. And so what has really changed over the last 3 or 4 years is that people aren't pretending anymore. They're not acting like they're okay with this. But what do the LGBT activists say? Well, they say it's because all the LGBT activists were scared to come here. This month, Tax Network USA proudly celebrates our nation's birthday, honoring freedom, resilience, and financial independence. To mark the occasion, they're offering 10% off all services through July 4th. If you're dealing with back taxes or missed the April 15th deadline, don't wait. The IRS is rapidly stepping up enforcement. Penalties can add up quickly, up to 5% per month, maxing out at 25% of your total tax bill just for not filing. And that's on top of what you already owe. But there's good news. Tax Network USA can still help you turn things around. Whether you're self-employed, run a business, or your books are a complete mess, their team knows how to cut through the chaos and find solutions that work. Your consultation is always free, and getting ahead of the problem now could help you avoid harsh penalties, wage garnishments, or surprise bank levies. Take the first step. Call 800-958-1000 or visit tnusa.com/Walsh. And don't forget, you'll get 10% off all services through July 4th as part of their celebration of our nation's birthday. Regain control of your finances with expert help from Tax Network USA. It's a fear that keeps them all away. Now, we heard that from the Canadian quote-unquote trans woman who said that he didn't want to come to the U.S. because he's scared. And apparently, according to the media and the organizers, that was the prevailing sentiment that led to a reduction in the crowd size by like 70%. Now, never mind the fact that these alleged fears are totally delusional. LGBT people face no threat, no danger in this country at all. That's why they have to make up hate crimes against themselves. Like we talked about last week, they have to invent these hate crimes because actual hate crimes against LGBT people are just not happening, basically non-existent. We've talked before about this with trans-identified people, and we've established that the murder rate for trans people in this country is actually lower than the murder rate for the general population. You are less likely to be killed if you're trans than if you are not trans. That's what the data tells us. So the whole idea that they would be scared of something, it's like a child being scared of the monster under the bed. It's completely imaginary. But that's not even the point. The point, to me, is that these people are, by their own testimony, total cowards. Just think about the cowardice here. By their own admission, they're absolute cowards. Sure, there's nothing to actually be afraid of, but they supposedly think there's something to be afraid of. And rather than face that fear, and show up and march for their ridiculous cause, they just run away en masse. According to them, 70% of them ran away because they were afraid. And that's what you notice about LGBT activists. Of their many vices, cowardice is up at the top. They're constantly talking about how scared they are. There's no group of people on earth, especially no group of political extremists, have ever been as scared as LGBT activists constantly are. And they're constantly telling us how afraid they are all the time of everything. Just the most fearful, scared people on the planet. And they don't face their fears. They don't fight on in spite of their fears. No, they just run away. They hide. At the slightest hint of any possible pushback, they run for the hills. An amazing level of cowardice. And why is that? Well, it's because LGBT pride, so-called, is not a real cause. It's not a real movement. It is an expression of self-centeredness. I mean, that's what pride is. It's right there in the name. It's pride, narcissism, self-obsession. That's all it is. And of course, people are not willing to put anything on the line for the sake of selfishness. Risking your life, or risking it in your imagination anyway, for the sake of selfishness would defeat the whole purpose. So they're not willing to do that. And we get this just totally cowardly display. All right, and compare that, by the way, to other groups of activists, say like pro-lifers, for example. pro-lifers during the Biden administration actually had something to be afraid of, actually had something to worry about, because the Biden administration was going around and arresting pro-lifers and throwing them in federal prison, sometimes for years at a time. Okay, that's not happening to LGBT activists. There's no campaign to go round these people up and throw them in prison. Even though many of them do commit crimes, and in that case they should be rounded up and thrown in prison, but there's no campaign to do that. The Trump administration isn't doing that. It was actually happening to pro-lifers, and yet pro-life activists they didn't stop their pro-life activism. Yeah, they still showed up for the March for Life every single year. They didn't all run home and hide under their beds. That's actual courage. But that's what you expect to see, because pro-lifers, like, what is the pro-life movement? They're speaking up not for themselves, but for someone else. That's there's no denying that. Even if you're pro-abortion, even if you hate pro-lifers, you can't reasonably deny the fact that pro-lifers are in it because they want to protect babies. Like, they don't benefit from this personally. A pro-life activist doesn't have anything personally at stake. They're not threatened by abortion laws because they've already been born. So they're there for someone else. And when you're motivated to protect someone else, that already requires a certain amount of moral courage and fortitude. And so it's no surprise to see pro-life activists acting with courage. But LGBT activists are in it for themselves, like, admittedly so. Admittedly, again, it's in there in the name and pride, but they are marching for the sake of their own ability to act however they want in public and dance around naked in public and all that kind of stuff. So it is all naturally very self-centered. And when you have a self-centered movement, you're not going to find the kind of courage and selflessness that you find in these real political movements like the pro-life movement. All right, here's or I should say, a real civil rights movement is the pro-life movement. I mean, they're both political movements, but the pro-life movement is a real civil rights movement, whereas the LGBT pride movement is not. If you'd like to see what else I have to say, you can access my full show by going to dailywire.com or by going to the Matt Walsh Show Twitter page. Hope to see you there. Godspeed.